In the middle of the journey of our life, I found myself in a dark wood, for the straight way had been lost. With that single line, Dante Alighieri opens one of the most enduring and terrifying journeys in all of literature. The Inferno, the first part of the Divine Comedy, is more than a medieval vision of hell. It's a map of the soul, a poetic anatomy of sin, and a mirror held up to history itself. Dante's descent into hell, guided by the Roman poet Virgil, is not just a punishment tore through an afterlife. It is a vast allegory of how human beings lose themselves, politically, morally, spiritually, and psychologically. The poem's genius lies in the way it transforms theology into narrative and history into myth, making Inferno one of the most ambitious works of moral imagination ever written. Dante wrote the Divine Comedy between roughly 1308 and 1320 during the exile from Florence. Banished for his political affiliations, he turned his personal suffering into art, using his journey through hell, purgatory, and later paradise as a metaphor for the soul's path to redemption. The structure of Inferno is mathematical perfection. 34 cantos written in terza rima, an interlocking rhyme scheme, ABA, BCB, CDC, forming an unbroken chain, each verse pulling the reader further downwards, deeper into the moral labyrinth. The language is Tuscan Italian, Dante's own vernacular, not Latin. In doing so, he elevated his narrative dialect to a literary standard, laying the foundation for modern Italian. The fusion of high theology with local speech was revolutionary. It meant that divine truth could be spoken in the language of the people. The poem's rhythm, vivid imagery, and conversational tone all serve the same purpose: to make the reader feel hell, not merely imagine it. So how has Dante mapped hell? Dante's hell is not chaos, it is symmetry. It descends in 9 circles, each reserved for a particular kind of sin, organized by severity. The deeper the circle, the colder, darker, and more self-destructive it becomes. At the top are sins of incontinence, lust, gluttony, greed, excesses of desire that still retain something recognizably human. But deeper lie sins of violence, where human will turns cruel. And at the very bottom are sins of fraud and treachery, where intellect itself, the divine gift of reason, is twisted into deceit. Each punishment is a contrapasso, a punishment that mirrors the sin's essence. The lustful are forever swept by uncontrollable winds, reflecting their inability to control passion. The gluttonous lie in filth, consumed by the same excess they once indulged in. The fraudulent are cloaked in flames, trapped by the lies they spun. Here, hell is therefore not an arbitrary system of torture, it is a moral geometry. Each punishment is a reflection of the sinner's inner state, made visible, physical, and eternal. When Virgil appears in the dark wood to guide Dante, it's a union of worlds, classical reason meeting Christian revelation. Virgil represents human intellect and poetic tradition, the author of the Aeneid, the poet of empire and order. He tells Dante that he was sent by Beatrice, Dante's ideal of divine love, to lead him out of despair. Virgil cannot enter paradise himself. He lived before Christ and therefore represents the noblest limit of pagan virtue. His presence defines a key theme of Inferno, that reason, while noble, cannot by itself reach salvation. Reason can diagnose the darkness, only grace can lead beyond it. Throughout the book, there is history as moral testimony. One of the most striking aspects of Inferno is that hell is populated not by anonymous souls, but the vivid historical individuals. There are kings, popes, poets, soldiers, many of whom Dante personally knew or politically despised. This blending of personal, historical, and mythological figures gives the poem its extraordinary realism. In the second circle, for instance, Dante meets Francesca da Rimini, who tells a story of how she fell in love with her husband's brother, Paolo, after reading about Lancelot and Guinevere. Her words are some of the most haunting in the poem. Dante faints from pity, overwhelmed by her beauty and suffering, yet the scene is morally ambiguous. Francesca's eloquence seduces us as readers, just as love seduced her. Dante forces us to confront our own susceptibility of beauty and sin, the peril of confusing compassion with complicity. In Canto 6, The gluttonous wallow under ceaseless rain, and among them is Cecco, a Florentine who prophesies political turmoil in the city Dante was exiled from, a city whose sins are engraved on eternity. The sixth circle, reserved for heretics, holds Farinata degli Riberti, a nobleman who opposed Dante's political faction. Farinata rises from his flaming tomb with defiant grandeur, declaring that even in hell he stood alone against his enemies. The encounter blurs the line between sinner and hero. Farinata's pride and dignity echo the tragic nobility of fallen greatness. In Canto 16, Dante meets Ulysses, condemned for fraudulent counsel. But this is not Homer's Ulysses, this is Dante's invention. Ulysses becomes the emblem of intellectual overreach, of reason untethered from morality. He recounts his final voyage, sailing beyond the Pillars of Hercules in search of knowledge forbidden to man. He writes, "Consider your origin. You were not made to live like brutes, but to follow virtue and knowledge." It is one of the most stirring and tragic speeches in the poem. Ulysses' noble words inspire admiration even as they condemn him. He represents the modern condition, humanity's desire to know everything, even at the cost of damnation. In a way, Ulysses is Dante's dark mirror, a poet of reason without grace, courage without limits. Dante also writes political and ecclesiastical condemnations. Hell is not only a theological map, it is also a political pamphlet. Dante names corrupt popes and cardinals with startling boldness. In Canto 19, the Simonists, those who sold church offices, are plunged headfirst into holes, their feet aflame. Dante singles out Pope Nicholas III, who mistakes him for Boniface VIII, the very pope responsible for Dante's exile. This encounter becomes a moment of savage irony, the poet confronting the living corruption of his time. These moments are not mere revenge fantasies, they are acts of moral record-keeping. Dante writes history into eternity, asserting that earthly power will one day answer to divine justice. The Inferno is as much about Florence, Rome, and the papacy as it is about heaven and hell. One of my more memorable parts is with Count Ugolino. As the journey nears its end, the tone of the poem grows colder, both literally and emotionally. In the ninth circle, the traitors are frozen in ice, the ultimate image of a soul turned inward, devoid of warmth or love. Here, Dante encounters Count Ugolino, eternally gnawing the skull of his betrayer, Archbishop Ruggieri. Ugolino's story of starvation and cannibalism and political treachery is one of the darkest scenes in Western literature. The horror lies not only in the physical image, but in the psychology. Dante's Ugolino alternates between confession and accusation, guilt and self-pity. His hunger becomes both literal and symbolic, the endless appetite of human vengeance. And of course, at the center of it all, in the center of hell, frozen in the lake of Cocytus, stands Lucifer, vast and silent, weeping from 6 eyes as he chews on Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. This final image is not of fire, but of ice, because evil in Dante's cosmology is not passion, but the absence of it. It is cold, mechanical, and self-consuming. Lucifer flaps his wings in eternal futility, the wind he generates freezing the lake that imprisons him. Evil creates the conditions of his own bondage. In the most astonishing twist of the poem, Dante and Virgil climb down Satan's body and find that at the center of the universe, gravity reverses. They emerge into daylight. So to rise, one must first descend. Inferno is a moral taxonomy, but also a meditation on the psychology of sin. Each circle dramatizes a failure of love, love disordered, misdirected, or corrupted. Lust is love that consumes. Pride is love of self above others. Treachery is the annihilation of love altogether. Dante's hell, then, is not a place of arbitrary punishment, but a landscape of human choice. It shows how sin distorts the human form, turning intellect into deceit, courage into rebellion, and desire into obsession. The poem also explores the limits of reason. Virgil can guide Dante through moral recognition, but cannot offer grace. Ulysses embodies the temptation of reason to overreach. Even Dante himself must learn to subordinate intellect to faith, pity to justice, and judgment to humanity. Politically, Inferno is an act of witness. Dante writes during a time when Italy was torn by factionalism. His howl preserves the memory of civic corruption and moral collapse, ensuring that injustice is not forgotten. It's as if the poem itself becomes a divine tribunal, literature as eternal judgment. So 7 centuries later, Dante's Inferno still defines how we visualize hell. Botticelli drew its spiral form, Doré engraved its terror in shadow and light. From Milton's Paradise Lost to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, from Borges' Labyrinths to modern video games and films, the imagery of descent, flame, and frozen guilt originates here. But more deeply, Inferno continues to shape how we think about justice, about the relationship between thought and sin, art and morality. Dante's sinners speak like real people, eloquent, self-justifying, tragic. They show us not monsters, but mirrors. The poem's ultimate warning is not that hell exists below us, but that it grows within us whenever we choose deceit over truth, or pride over love, or comfort over conscience. In the book, there is the dark wood and the light beyond. When Dante emerges from hell, he looks up to see the stars, the same stars that open and close each canticle of the Divine Comedy. It is a reminder that descent is necessary for ascent, that understanding evil is part of recovering. The Inferno is paradoxically a book about hope. It leads the reader through the worst of human nature so that they may desire better. Its final image, light breaking through after darkness, suggests that moral clarity is born only from confrontation with our own shadows. And then we emerged to see again the stars. I also just want to take a moment to go over Canto 24. This was my favorite canto in the entire book. There are moments in Inferno when Dante pauses the relentless descent to let time breathe again, and Canto 24 is one of the most beautiful of these. After the violent imagery of the thieves' Bolgia, where serpents twist through bodies and sin becomes a literal metamorphosis, Dante opens the canto not with fire or ice, but with an image of a Tuscan farmer watching the changing of the seasons. He writes, "In that season of the year when the sun's warmth softens the hoar frost of the meadow's face, and the farmer, tired, gets up to see his fields. The scene is quiet, pastoral, utterly human. A farmer wakes early on a winter morning, sees the frost lying white on his fields, and despairs that his crops will fail. And then, as the dawn breaks and the earth softens under the sun, he takes heart and goes to work again. It is a startling change of tone, placed deliberately after the horrors of Canto 23. Dante begins with this miniature pastoral not to digress, but to mirror his own internal transformation. Just as the farmer loses and regains hope, Dante the pilgrim experiences spiritual fatigue, exhaustion of moral vision, and then finds renewal in perseverance. But what is the meaning of the farmer's image? On one level, the simile is naturalistic, a vivid observation in daily life in the Italian countryside. But on another, it is psychological and moral. The farmer's despair and renewed determination echo Dante's own feelings at this midpoint of the 8th circle. In the previous canto, he and Virgil had narrowly escaped the male branch, the grotesque devils who guard the fraudulent. The chaos and trickery of that episode represents the instability of sin itself. As Canto 24 begins, Dante feels drained, shaken by deceit. The frozen dawn symbolizes spiritual desolation, the paralysis that follows fear. But then, as the farmer's frost melts under the sun, Dante's faith and courage thaw. The image thus marks a transition of temperament, from doubt to determination, from paralysis to endurance. The farmer's field becomes a metaphor for the soul's landscape, barren under the chill of despair, fertile again under the warmth of divine reason and hope. Virgil here immediately takes on a sterner tone, urging Dante forward. He tells him that moral strength is not the absence of fear, but the will to act despite it. He says, "Get up, conquer your breath with your soul. There's no one fit for fame who lies in bed." This is the language of mentorship. Virgil, as reason personified, reminds Dante, and by extension the reader, that moral progress requires work and motion and resilience. In the world of fraud where deceit twists the intellect, steadfast movement becomes a form of virtue. The farmer's simile thus frames the canto's theme, renewal through endurance. It's the moral pivot that prepares Dante to witness the horrors of the thieves' Bolgia that follow, the constant metamorphosis between human and serpent where identity itself dissolves. Surprisingly, all of this happens just within one page of the entire book. This humble, rural image, so easy to overlook, compresses within it the entire structure of the comedy: despair, awakening, perseverance, and grace. Canto 24 reminds us that Inferno is not only a gallery of punishment, it is a poem about perseverance. The farmer in the frost is every person who has woken in darkness and chosen to go on working. Amidst the roaring devils and the twisting serpents, Dante inserts this quiet moment of light, a thaw in the moral winter. It is the sound of the poet catching his breath, remembering that even in hell there are signs of spring. Thus was I armed again with better will, and thought within myself, I can go on. That line is the moral heartbeat of the entire Divine Comedy. It is the moment where human endurance and divine purpose briefly align, the moment when the frost of despair yields to the sunlight of resolve. Dante's Divine Comedy is revolutionary, staggering, brilliant, and beautiful. It is an important work that I recommend everybody to read. Have you read it? Will you read it? Thank you for watching my video essay on Dante's Inferno. I haven't read the other two poems yet, but I will be reading them sometime soon. And if you liked this video, please remember to like and subscribe to my channel, and see you again soon for more video essays. Goodbye.